Just a second. Let's get started. Put this on the side. Okay. Right. So tonight we're going to learn the halachas. Hopefully there'll be some very practical stuff where we will look at the halachas of broken kalim, but in a way that, unlike what we spoke about last time, it'll be. I think this one will be far more practical. But as always, just as we start, I'd like to share with you a beautiful idea, which is connected to the parasha. Okay, so we start off with what appears to be a machlokas between the Ramban and the Chinuch. It's not a proper machlokas as such, as we'll understand. There are two different perspectives on Shabbos. The Ramban in Parshas Yisro, when he's on the posuk Zocher es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadshay, he says that the purpose and the focus of Shabbos, coming straight after HaKadosh Baruch Hu establishing himself as being the source of all power, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, don't have other gods, and then he says, Zocher es Yom HaShabbos. What's the idea? The idea is that through keeping Shabbos and observing the Shabbos, we accept and we acknowledge that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. Simple as that. And that's a very basic idea. Kisheshes Yomim also Hashem es Hashomayim ves haaretz, and on the seventh day he rested. And when we keep Shabbos, we are testifying to the fact that we agree with this. The Chinuch, on the other hand, the Minchas Chinuch rather. The Minchas Chinuch, he says that Shabbos is not so much about remembering the past, but it is actually about acknowledging that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is still mashgiach, that he actively is involved in running the world. Now, obviously, this is not a machlekas. Many of you will probably chap immediately that this is the difference between the first set of Aseres HaDibros and the second set. In the first set, in Parshas Yisro, we are told the purpose of Shabbos is to remember Hashem created the world. In the second set, in Voice Chanan, we talk about Yitzias Mitzrayim, which emphasizes Hashem's involvement in the world. And of course, these are two different perspectives, but they complement each other. So is it about the past? Is Shabbos about the past? Is Shabbos about the future? Let's try and connect it to an amazing and beautiful and relevant idea, this week's parasha. Very famous episode, you all know the story. The end of his life, Yaakov Avinu asks his son Yosef to bring his two sons, Yosef and Ephraim, that he's going to bench them. And that indeed becomes the hallmark, that is the prototype. We bench our kids Friday night, Yisimcha lehim k'Ephraim v'chi Menashe. But what happens in the story? Yosef places, as you know, his oldest son Menashe to the right and his younger son Ephraim to the left. Right is always considered to be more important. And Yaakov doesn't like this. And he does an interesting thing. And there's 2 things here we want to point out. Number one is the language that he uses. He refuses to do what Yosef wants him to do. And he uses a word which is so evocative. It resonates. It speaks to us because we know where we have seen this word before. The word is vayemo'en. He refuses. Yaakov refuses to do what Yosef wants. Vayemo'en. And we say to ourselves, where have we heard this word before? And of course, we know that Yosef, in his greatest challenge, when he is challenged with the wife of Potiphar, Vayemo'en, he refuses. His greatest moment of moral courage, of Yiras Shamayim, Vayemo'en, he refuses. And Yaakov, so to speak, almost throws this word at him. Vayemo'en, he says, no, Vayemo'en, what's going on? And the second point is, he doesn't switch the kids around. He doesn't take Menashe and put him on the left, say, oh, Menashe is less important. He leaves Menashe where Yosef places him. He allows him to remain on the right. Instead, he swaps his hands. What does that mean? What on earth is going on? There is a beautiful idea from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He says an amazing thing. He says, think about Menashe. The word Menashe is Nashani Elikim es kol amoli. HaKadosh Baruch Hu challenged me. Yosef calls his oldest son in Mitzrayim forgetfulness. Menashe, Nashani. Why? Because he knew that was his biggest challenge. He is disconnected from his ruchnius, from his roots, from his father, from everything that he believes in, and he's going to forget. So each time he called his kid, Menashe, 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 what's he saying? He's saying, I mustn't forget, I mustn't forget, I must remain connected to my roots, to my past, to my history. That's his first child. And then his next child, it's almost the opposite. He gives thanks to Hashem, Ki hifrani Elokim be'eretz oni. You allowed me to be fruitful, to not just to not drown in Mitzrayim, but I actually steiged, I grew. Hifrani, I am fruitful, I've had brocha. And of course, one depends on the other. If a person is able to not to forget and to remember their roots and where they're connected to and where they come from, then that gives them the basis that enables them to move forward with strength, with hope, with pride. And this is the machloikus between Yosef and Yaakov. Yosef put his son Menashe first. He's saying to his father, to me, as we go, we head into Golus and Golus Mitzrayim, and you're about to die. The bracha that I want to have first is never forget who we are, where we come from. That's the first thing. And then if we remember we had a Chafetz Chaim, a Rambam, a Moshe Rabbeinu, a Rabbi Akiva, then we can move forward. Then we can have an Ephraim. But Yaakov said no. But what does Yaakov do? Interestingly, he doesn't just totally disagree with him. He accepts the point. He leaves Menashe in pole position. Yeah, Formula One. He leaves Menashe there. He leaves him there. He just swaps the hands. That's all he does. In other words, he says, yes, of course, you must never forget your past, but don't linger on the past. The focus, where is your energies? Make sure you never forget. Of course, you're right. Let's leave Menashe on the right. But my right hand, said Yaakov, my right hand, my focus is on Ephraim. Ki hifrani Elokim. My focus is always, what can I do in this Golos? How can I grow? How can I keep growing? How can I focus more? And that essentially, so it's not a real malchlekas as such, but it's never to lose sight of the two things. Number one, the starting point is, of course, where do we come from? Don't forget our roots and our history. And this is what the Ramban is saying. Bria Sa'olam. Shabbos is about Hashem created the world. Let's never forget that. But says the Minchas Chinuch, the purpose of it is so that me here in Berlin, 2020 or 2021 soon, that I'm able to use that memory to focus forwards. How am I going to steig? How am I going to grow in Golus? Because that is the focus, that is the vision, that is the purpose. So of course they are both correct. An amazing story. I hope you haven't heard it before. It's an unbelievable story, beautiful story. Stories in 1953, not long after the Holocaust. It was just towards the end of the third Dafayomi cycle. There was a Yid who lived in Yerushalayim, and he was known as Yankele HaKoines. Yankele HaKoines. Now, you may or may not know, many of you will know, HaKoines is the name of the sixth perek in Bava Kama. And this person, Yankele, was a Tzebrochene Yid, as we say in Yiddish. Forgive me of the German. He was a Tzebrochene Yid, but he was known as Yankele HaKoines. He had a shop in Rehov Hillel. And he's on his way one evening on the way home from work, from his shop in Rehov Hillel, and he bumps into Reb Chaim, who is the local Dafayomi Magid Shir. And Reb Chaim notices that Yankele HaKoines is looking depressed, and he says, "Was tutzach? What's the problem? Are you still remembering what happened to you he was in Buchenwald, Yankele HaKoines? He said, yes, but he said, it's more than that. He said, what is it? He said, tell me, have you got 5 minutes to listen to my story? He said, yes, I'll tell you the following story. This is who I am. He says, when I was a kid, a cheder yingel, I went to cheder, and the Torah didn't enter my head. I was a verstopte Kopf, as we say in Yiddish. The Torah didn't enter, and it upset my parents so much. I tried, it wasn't my thing. I really tried. I wasn't a naughty boy. I just couldn't. And eventually he said, my father took me aside and said, Neshomala, Yankele, here's a gold coin. I've saved this up. I have a gold coin. I don't know what it was. A gold coin. If you can memorize Baal Peh, one daf of Gemara, I'll give you this gold coin. He said a gold coin was a big thing, a big treasure. He said, so I decided what I would do is I just worked hard and I memorized and memorized and memorized and worked hard. Eventually, I memorized the first daf of HaKoines. And I went home proudly, and I said, they sat me at the supper table, my mother and my father, and I recited the first daf of HaKoines Baal Peh. He said, my parents burst out crying, such nachas, and my father gave me a kiss and this gold coin. He said, that's one of the last times I saw them. Not long afterwards, my parents went, I never saw them again, and I was sent to Buchenwald. He said, Buchenwald, he said, it was terrible. He said, there were others who tried learning then. I had nothing. I had one possession with me. I had my daf of HaKoines. And whenever I could, I just said over again and again and again in the bunks at night while I was working, had that daf of HaKoines again and again and again. Eventually, b'chesed, I escaped. I was rescued at the end of the war. I found my way. Now here I'm in Yerushalayim, and I thought, now I can maybe go to a Gemara Shir. And he said the same thing again. I go to the Gemara Shir. I've tried a few times to learn, to go to the daf. Skate nicht. It doesn't work. It's not working. I can't. And I'm so zerbrochen. Now I know there's a daf Hayomi Siyam. He said, tell me, can I come to the Siyam? He said, I know you have learned 2,700 daf Gemara. He said, I promise you, I have learnt that daf of HaKoines much more than 2,700 times. Can I come to the Siyam? Maggid Shir said, of course you can come to the Siyam. Because my Siyam is a Siyam on what we learnt. We've been through the whole of Shas. Your Siyam is a Siyam on your Golus, a Siyam on your history. And this actually, they turned it into a very beautiful song. If you want, anybody wants, I can send you the link. Moti Steinmetz sang it very beautifully. It's on YouTube. Oh, somebody's already sent the Akiva. Kol hakavod. Very, very beautiful. He says the story a bit differently. I heard it from somebody else a bit differently. So this is the idea. This Yankele HaKoines had within him the message of Ephraim and Menashe. He remembered his parents' tears. He remembered the Menashe, but he used that daf to remain connected to the past. And on the basis of that, he used that to bring it into the present. And this, of course, is our challenge. Our challenge is to remember our glorious past, but then to say, halacha l'maisa. And this is what brings us to our shiur this evening. And we're going to start with 7 questions, okay? You can unmute yourselves, I think you can. If you want to comment on the questions, I'm going to go through a series. I'll send them to you afterwards, as always. Here's a series of 7 questions, very lemaisa. We're going to talk about a guy who had an epic Shabbos. I don't know if you know what that word means, epic. Now, epic can mean epic amazing or epic no good. This guy had an epic no good Shabbos. Okay, you want to hear what happened to him? 7 different things happened to him this Shabbos. And each of them is a shaila, which we're going to try and paskin. The first thing is he wakes up Shabbos morning and he hears his wife shouting. What happened? She has a jewelry box. It's a little, one of these small jewelry boxes. It's like a little cupboard, right? It's a jewelry box and the door fell off. The door fell off. Question number 1, shaila number 1, is the jewelry box muktzah? Is the door muktzah? That's shaila number 1. You manage to fall back asleep again for a short while, and you go to shul. You're tired. You sit down on one of the benches. As you sit down on the benches in shul, one of the legs break, and you land on the floor. Are you allowed? Shaila number 2. Are you allowed to lift the broken bench and place it maybe on top of another bench in order to sit down on it, or is the bench muktzah? That's shaila number 2. Shaila number 3, you finally sit down and you notice that when you fell to the ground, the button on your suit jacket fell off. and the button is there on the floor. Can you pick up the button, or is the button muktzah? That was shaila number 3. You're not in a great mood. And then you have the good fortune that the chazan for Musaf likes the sound of his own voice, and he's krechzing away, and it seems to be taking a long time. So you look at your watch, see what's going on, and you see it stopped. Your watch stopped at 6 a.m. that morning. Are you allowed to continue wearing the watch, or do you have to remove it? That is shaila number 4. Let's move on. Your epic Shabbos morning continues. In the middle of davening, you thought, okay, this guy's going on with Musaf. I'll go to the bathroom. I need to go to the bathroom. You go to the bathroom. You're not very happy. You close the door maybe quite hard, and the door handle falls off. You're now stuck. So can you, but the door handle is on the floor. Do you sit there till the end of Shabbos? Is the door handle muktzah? What can you do? How can you open it? You finally get out, and amazingly, you think maybe your luck is turning. There's an amazing kiddush this Shabbos. 4 types of kugel, 3 types of cholent. The richest guy in shul is making a massive simcha, and you really think, okay, now my luck's going to turn. So everybody's running to get to the thing, and somebody on their way to get to the kugel knocks past you. Your glasses go flying off, and the handle on one of the sides of the glasses breaks off, and one of the lenses fall out as well. What do you do? Are the pieces muktzah? Can you pick them up? Can you put them back in? And finally, you can't see properly. Your wife comes to pick you up from shul. Of course, there's an eruv. And you're ready to go back home and relax. You've had a terrible morning on the way home. The wheel falls off the stroller, the agala, the buggy of the pushing your 2-year-old home. Is the stroller muktzah? Is the wheel muktzah? So you're having a really not a great Shabbos. 7 different shilas, and they are all connected to the continuation of the concept that we learned 2 weeks ago, last time. Okay? Anybody want to comment, or should we get straight to it? Okay? All right. Beseda. So let's get straight to it. Let's remind ourselves of where we are up to in the sugya of Shivrei Kelim. Where are we up to? Until now, we have discussed the key idea when you are faced with a broken part of something is it muktzah or not? Can it be used for a purpose? That has always been the criteria, right? Remember? Can it be used? Can I still use it or not? However, we're going to see shortly, and this is really what tonight's shir is mainly about, is that there is an exception to this din, where at least according to the Mishnah Brura, even if broken parts of a keli cannot be used for any other purpose, they might still not be muktzah. We need to look first at the Gemara to understand this din. We need to look at the Shulchan Aruch, Seif, Ches, Tes, and Tezayin, and from there we will branch out to all of the practical applications. Now, if you want, I can screen share. I don't know whether you prefer that, but maybe we'll do that. You know what? I'll screen share for the benefit of those that maybe didn't manage to print out or don't have them to hand. Let's try and do this. Hopefully it will work. Bear with me a second. 1 second. Let's get the right screen. Sorry, just bear with me. Let's try this. No, that's the wrong one. 1 second. Here we go. Right, I've got it. Okay, let's go back to the Zoom. Let's screen share. And here you'll be able to see the Maramakomas. Okay, it's up there big on the screen. You should be able to see it. All right, so we are going to start from source 62. Okay, let me move this down. Move this across so at least I can see it. Can everybody see it? Yes? Source 62, the Gemara. Let's go through the Gemara. Says the Gemara. Oma Abaya. Says Abaya. Hochi ka'oma. Kol hakelim nitolin b'Shabbos. A keli. If you have a keli, any keli can be moved on Shabbos. V'dal soisehen imohen. And their doors, the deles, The deles of a keli can be moved with it, af al pi shenis parku, even if it falls off. So if the door of a keli, and I'm using the word keli very specifically, it's very important to realize a keli is something that is transportable. So this fellow's wife's jewelry box, it's a little portable thing. That's a keli. So the Gemara says if the deles falls off it, it can be moved. It's not muktzah. So both the jewelry box and the door are not muktzah. Kol hakelim nitolim b'Shabbos v'dalsei sehen imohen, and the doors with them, even if they fall apart on Shabbos. Okay? Now, the Gemara then goes, we'll explain why shortly, and we'll talk about some exceptions, but let's continue the Gemara. The next line, Tonu Rabbanon, Deles shel shida v'shel teva v'shel migdal, noitlin avaloi machzirin. There is a deles of a type of box which you're allowed to take off, but you cannot return. We'll talk about that shortly. What does that mean? And v'shelul shel tarnagolim, which is a chicken, in English, it's a chicken coop, right? It's where you keep chickens. There, the halacha is you cannot take the door off and you can't return it. Okay? We will deal with this a little bit later. We'll understand why. But now let's go back to the door. The first thing is the door. How does the door work? So if you have the Mishnah Berurah to hand, the Shulchan Aruch to hand, it will probably be useful to have a look at it. Let's have a look at the Shulchan Aruch in Seif Ches. What I can do actually is I can actually share that with you as well, and that would be, where's the Shulchan Aruch? Okay, you know what? It's probably easier swapping between this. There must be an easy way of doing it. But let me read out to you. The Shulchan Aruch says in Seif Ches as follows. Kol hakelim anitolim b'Shabbos dal seisen shenisparku mehem nitolin bein nisparku b'chol bein nisparku b'Shabbos. I'll translate that. That is the Gemara. He paskins the Gemara. If a keli breaks, whether it breaks on Friday or whether it breaks on Shabbos, it makes no difference. The door of a keli does not become muktzah. Why is that? What's the reason? So the Mishnah Berurah explains, if you can see in Sifkot and Lamed Hey, the Mishnah Berurah explains, because, and this is true even if you could do nothing else with the door. You can't do anything else with the door. Doesn't matter. Because the door was originally connected to a keli. The door does not lose its status as a keli, even if it has no other purpose. Okay? That is only true of a keli. The door of a window or a house is different. That's muktzah because that's never a keli. It's connected to a house. And with a house, there's a halacha, boine and soiser. You're not allowed to build. You're not allowed to destroy, to demolish, okay? When Shabbos came in, your window was part of a house, and therefore it is muktzah, right? So these are the two cases on the extreme. Again, the lenient case is a portable keli, which has a door. That is all part of the keli, and even if the door comes off before Shabbos and the door has no use, it doesn't matter, it's part of a keli, and therefore it does not become muktzah. Then you have at the other end of the spectrum, you have something which is mechubar lekarka. It is connected to the ground, such as your door at home, or a window, or the chicken coop, which is connected to the ground. That is different because there you have a problem of it was never a keli. It is, therefore you also have a problem of boiner and soiser, building or demolishing, and therefore if your door at home falls off, it is muktzah. And then you have something in between. There's an in-between case, and that was the Gemara there you can see in the middle. This is the deles of a sheda, teva, and migdal, a type of box. There it says you can take it off, noitlin, avaloi machzirin, but you can't return it. What is going on? Why should you not be able? What is this middle degree that you can take it off, but you can't return it? What is all that about? Says, let's go to the end of the Gemara there, still on source 62, the last two lines. Omar Rava, says Rava, we are of the opinion, ein binyan bekalim ve'ein stira bekalim. This is a very important halacha, and it goes as follows. We know there is something called boiner and soiser, building and demolishing, which is an isur min ha-Torah. It's one of the 39 malachos on Shabbos. But building and demolishing generally applies to something which is connected to the ground. What about something which is not connected to the ground, a keli? If you build a keli or if you demolish a keli on Shabbos, is that osur? So the halacha is, generally speaking, it is not forbidden min haTorah, at least. There might be other problems, okay? And this is the whole sugya of possibly opening different types of packaging on Shabbos. But min haTorah, there is no boina or soiser on kelim. However, therefore, this middle type of keli, a shida, teva, or migdal, it's a type of, it's very hard to know exactly what it is. It's a type of box where there are two possible ways of attaching the door. You can either attach the door loosely and lightly, or you can attach it b'chozek, with koyach. And here, says Rava, we have the Chazal came along and made a gezerah. They made a decree. This is the last line of the Gemara here. Kosava ein binyan bekelim vein stira bekelim. The truth be told, there is no real boiner, building or demolishing does not exist with kelim. But the underlined there, ugzera shema yitoka. Chazal were concerned that even though you're allowed to remove the door from this portable sort of closet, but we don't allow you to return it because you might put it in forcefully. So what? What would be the problem with that? This is a bit of a machlokas, whether it would be makeh bepatish or it would be a form of boiner, midrabanan. But either way, it's sort of an in-between stage. Okay? Now, so let's see how are we going to paskin, and how is this going to work for us? Let's look at the Shulchan Aruch Harav. And he takes the following line. Okay. Let's just see the best way of doing this. Okay. The Shulchan Aruch paskins in Seif Tes that you're allowed to remove the doors of a portable closet. So back to this guy's wife's little jewelry box, which stands on some legs, right? So you could take the door off. Right? So the Shulchan Aruch, according to the Shulchan Aruch Harav, he says that you're allowed to take it off. That's only if the doors are not securely fastened to the closet. But if they are securely fastened, then you wouldn't be allowed to do it. Okay? That's what the Shulchan Aruch Harav paskins. And additionally, he says, even if you would be allowed to take it off, because maybe it isn't on very strongly, but we would not allow you to put it back on because that might be a problem of Shema Yitoka, like we saw in the Gemara. Okay? And let's see the way he puts it. He says, Avalim hein tukuin b'chozek, if they were on strongly, yesh b'frikosan mishum soiser, ka'asher yizbayer, as we shall see. Okay? So the chicken coop, the Shulchan Aruch paskins in Seif Tes, is prohibited. You cannot take away or return the cover to the chicken coop. Why? Because it's connected to the ground, and therefore we have boina or seisa. Let us summarize before we move forward, because it's going to be relevant to us to understand when I'm looking at a keli, which category does it fall into? So I'm going to summarize, okay? And I'll give you the notes on this later as well. If a door breaks off a keli, the door is not muktzah if you plan to return the door to the original keli, and because therefore it never loses the status of a keli. It goes without saying that the keli itself, so this fellow's wife's jewelry box, the keli itself, can also be moved on Shabbos, and it's not muktzah, even though it's missing the door. We'll come back to that later. Furthermore, you would be allowed to remove the door if it isn't fastened securely, but returning it would be forbidden for a gzeira, shema yitoka, shema yitka, in case you come to put it in very strongly. Okay? That is kind of where we're up to at the moment. Those are the basic rules. We will see now source 64. The last piece of the jigsaw puzzle we need to put into place, and then hopefully we'll be able to apply them to all the different cases. And the last thing we're going to get to is an oven. Now, it seems that this oven was not attached to the ground. Okay, otherwise it would have the din of a chicken coop. So what a kira is not attached to the ground. So what's that? It says the Gemara. we're doing source 64. I'll tell you the case now. A case is that a leg falls off your oven. Okay? So can you move the oven? Can you move the leg? Let's have a look. Says the Gemara, Desanya, Kira shenishmata achas miyarchiseha. If an oven, one of its legs slip out, mutalataltala. Says the Gemara, initially you're allowed to carry it. Shtayim osor, but if two fall out, you're not allowed to. Rav says no, and we paskin like Rav. Rav says afilu chad nami osor, even if only one leg falls off, you cannot. Why? Gzeira shema yitoka. The same thing we saw before. Because for a gzeira decree that you might go and put it back in properly. Okay? The Shulchan Aruch paskins in Sif Tezayin paskins like this Gemara. The Ramah adds over there in Sif Tezayin that we would apply this to a bench. So if one of the legs fall off the bench becomes muktzah. You're not allowed to return. Well, sorry, I spoke too soon. We'll come back to that. You're not allowed to put, says the Ramah, you're not allowed to put the leg back in the bench. Okay, therefore you couldn't put the bench on another fixed bench in order to sit on it, unless you had sorted out, you'd set aside the broken bench on the fixed bench before Shabbos. Okay, so even though it is clear that the bench itself is muktzah, but Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach asks the following shaila. What about the leg of the bench? Is it the same? Do we treat it the same as the bench itself? He starts off by saying he's not sure whether the leg of the bench is also going to be muktzah. Is the leg similar to the door of a keli that breaks where the door isn't muktzah? Or maybe the leg should be muktzah, because since we're saying the bench is muktzah and we're viewing the leg as part of the bench, then maybe it should be muktzah. So have a look what he says over here in Shulchan Shlomo. He says, Yesh mokim levarer. It needs to be clarified. He's not clear. Le'inyan tiltul haregel shel hakira. What about moving the regel of the kira? So of course, the kira itself, the oven itself, and the bench, there it becomes muktzah, right? We have a gzeira, shema yitka. You might fix it back in. But does that make the leg muktzah or not? He says he's not sure, and look at the end. He says, perhaps it is no different to a keli shemalachta le'isa, which would mean you would therefore be able to move it. But then he asks the following question, and this is really an important question for us to understand in the lomdus, in the principle of all of this, because we have two different halachas here from the Shulchan Aruch, and they don't appear to go along with each other. In Seif Tes, we saw a broken door, that's okay. But in Seif Tezayin, we see the broken leg of a bench is not okay. Asks Reb Shlomo Zalman, what is the difference? Why is a broken leg of a bench no good, but the broken door of a portable closet is okay? So this is source 66. Tzarechiyun. Ask Reb Shlomo Zalman. Misif Tes. In Seif Tes we saw Shem Mutal Taltal Hadeles Shel Hashida V'Lei Chashinan Shem Yitoka. You can move the deles. There you can move the deles. But why is it with the leg of the bench you can't? Why does the Ramah say you can't move it? V'nirali debechi haygavna de'efshel ishtamish im hashida k'mei shehi legazrinon mash'enken bekira v'safsel shenishbar. Sorry, let me clarify a bit more. Maybe I didn't make myself totally clear. The question is not so much about the leg, about the leg or the door. The question is the keli. Sorry, the keli. He himself asked a shaila whether the leg of the bench would be treated like the bench or not. But the bench becomes muktzah, the kira becomes muktzah, the oven becomes muktzah. On the other hand, we said in Seif Tes that the portable closet itself is not muktzah. What's the difference? And he gives a simple, elegant answer, which is really the key to understanding this sugya. Look what he says. V'nirali. Let's go back to this guy with his wife's jewelry thing. It's missing a door. She's upset. It doesn't look nice. Fine. But it is still functional. You can still, even without the door, it can still hold her jewelry. It can do its job. Therefore, it was a keli. What was the purpose of the keli? To hold jewelry. It can still perform its function. Therefore, it doesn't become muktzah. On the other hand, what is the point of having a bench with one leg? What is the point of having an oven with one leg and it's on a slant? You can't cook anything. You can't do anything with it. And this is now the principle which we're going to apply as we go through these various scenarios. It is true that the Shulchan Aruch says that a keli, that was a keli and remains a keli, even if the bits of the keli do not perform a function, they are not muktzah. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is this keli now on Shabbos still able, is the keli able to do something? Or does the keli immediately become useless? If the keli immediately becomes useless, then of course it's muktzah. Okay? And that's what he says over here. And that is very, very logical. Okay? So let's look at the halachic conclusion is, if part of a keli breaks off on Shabbos, that piece is not muktzah if you intend to reattach it, but that's only if the keli in its current state remains usable. But if the keli, now that it's missing this piece, you can't do anything with it, then you are not allowed to move the keli, certainly not allowed to move the keli, and possibly the broken piece as well, in case you come to fix it on Shabbos. Okay? There's a bit of a shaila here. I want to continue. Okay, I'm going to leave that bit out. Let's move on. Now let's go to the practicalities and let us address all 7 questions. Okay? Not necessarily in the same order that we saw them, but now we have all the tools that we need to address all of these shailas. Let's go to the button. Your suit button falls off on Shabbos. Let's see what Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says here. Source 67 here on your screen. Okay? V'hakaftoir atzmai, kashanofal. Your button. What about the button? And it falls. Mutter letaltaloi ve'ein by mishum muktzah. Says Reb Shlomo Zalman, it's not muktzah. You can move it. Not a problem. Why? Because the garment can still be worn. The garment is still functionable. Your jacket, you can still wear your jacket. You can still wear your shirt. You're missing a button. No big deal. You can pick up the button. What's the problem? Okay? Interesting. Look how he continues. Ach toiv lahachmir b'zeh. He says, however, it's a good idea to be machmir, and we need to understand this why. Why? Mikiven sheka'es einoi ro'oi l'kol shimush. Because as it is currently, you can't do anything with it. Let me just see. You can't do anything with it. Now, where does this come from? So, there are some Rishonim who hold that the broken door of a portable closet is not muktzah only if it has some other use, right? So even though we don't paskin like that, but he says there is a toiv lahachmir. So I would say as follows. Halacha l'maisa, I would say as follows, and we're going to come to the opinion of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in a minute. If it is the sort of button that there are some buttons which are more distinct than others, and they're harder to find than others. Yeah. So I would say to some extent it depends. If that button is a button that you're definitely going to need, you can pick it up. It's not muktzah, but to take into account some of the other opinions of the Rishonim, there are poskim, as we shall see, who actually paskin differently. Therefore, there is an inyan to be machmir, and I think you should need to judge it on the basis of the case and how necessary it is. Okay, let's see what Rav Moshe Feinstein says now. Yes, Elia.
I have a question. What is about the buttons which we have on the shorts and even on our sweats? Some for exchange. They are. I don't know if you see something like this one. This button, I don't need them for the wearing. The question is...
So by the way, that is a different shaila. That's a shaila of carrying.
Yeah, that's a
whole set. That's nothing to do with muktzah. Nothing to do with muktzah. Right. So I think as far as muktzah is concerned, it wouldn't make a difference which button fell off. Right?
Okay.
From the muktzah perspective, which is what we're discussing, makes no difference which button falls off. What we will see a bit later is if the button falls off and as a result of the button falling off, you're not able to wear, then that's a different story.
Okay.
Yeah. But you're asking a very good shaila, but it's not a muktzah shaila. It's a shaila stama shaila. Are you allowed to walk in the street with these extra buttons? And that they
for Shabbos suite I cut it
right.
up.
But from a muktzah perspective, it's the same. It's no different to any other button. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Fine. Thank you. Let's see what Reb Moshe says. Let's go on to the next source. Reb Moshe, source 68. Igros Moshe. Kol hakaftorim havale muktzah. Reb Moshe was of the opinion all buttons are muktzah. Why? Reb Moshe says an interesting thing. Because Reb Moshe takes into account the other opinion, the opinion of the Rishonim who say that even the broken parts of a keli have to have some use. And therefore, since nowadays nobody does anything with a button, therefore, Reb Moshe holds the button is muktzah. Nisparik. He asks Reb Moshe a question on himself. The Shulchan Aruch paskins in Sif Ches that the door of a keli is not muktzah. So why should a button be muktzah? He said because you can do something with a door. A door is a piece of it's got some length and some breadth. You can do something with it. Something with a button. What can you do with a button? There's nothing to do with a button. Fascinating. So he does concede. He says, then have a muktzah. If you indeed have something you could do with that button, then it's taka, not muktzah. So be aware there's a machlokes Reb Shlomo Zalman and Reb Moshe whether a button is muktzah or not. Okay. And now Reb Ovadia Yosef paskins that a button here, the next source 69, that a button that falls off on Shabbos is not muktzah. But again, interestingly, he does add hamachmir tovoy olav bracha. He takes into account the other opinions of the Rishonim. So he paskins ein lo muktzah, right? It's not ein lo din muktzah. It's mutar l'taltaloi. But hamachmir tovoy olav bracha. And maybe Ilya, this is connected to your point. He goes on and says in the brackets, if you can see there, v'kafter chodosh shaloi hoya bebeged harehu muktzah. If you just have a button lying around at home, a spare button, but the button has never been attached, of course that's muktzah. Because what we're talking about over here is something that was part of a beged, part of a keli.
My question was actually, yeah.
Okay. Let me just give you the vote. The vote is when something was attached to a keli, then it is part of a keli. It's part of the keli. Even though I know where you're coming from, Ilya, I get your point. Good point. That it didn't have a function. Yes, it didn't have a function. You couldn't close your shirt with it, but maybe it has a different function. The function is that if you need a button, you can. But it's attached to. It is connected to the keli. And
my point was actually that even it is broken, or I'm not going to put it again on the same place. I will maybe put it somewhere in the house, but I wouldn't nail it.
That doesn't matter.
No.
Why should that matter? If the idea is that when Shabbos comes in, if something was a part of a keli, it retains the status of not becoming muktzah, even if it doesn't have a function now, because it is still called, it's part of a keli. It was part of a keli, and therefore it's a bit of a keli that's fallen off, and therefore it's not muktzah. That's the point.
Okay.
Yeah? So maybe that's a bit clearer. Thank you for helping me to clarify this and say it even clearer. Very good. Okay. I just want to add very quickly, there are other poskim, such as the Minchas Shabbos and the Bris Olam, Michal Zilber, who hold that it's not muktzah at all. Okay? So there is definitely room to be makel. Okay? Now, what would happen, let's take this a little bit further, what would happen if all the buttons fall off your shirt or your jacket? Okay, that's not very common, but you're getting to a point where maybe if one jacket falls, or let me put it this way, if as a result of this button missing, let's say it's the second button to go, if as a result of this button not being there, you would not wear the beged, that's the shaila, right? The garment is not wearable, okay? So a broken keli, if it's not normally used in its current form, you're not allowed to use it. So the bench, if you're not going to use the bench can't be used, then the bench becomes muktzah. So what happens if now my suit can't be worn, right? So does it become muktzah or not? So it would seem, I think logic would dictate that it would be muktzah, but there is one of the achronim in the Sefer Megillah Sefer who draws the following slight distinction. It's interesting. It's an interesting idea. He says it's mutter based on the Taz. Now listen to this. Here is where we're going to sort of turn things on its head a little bit. Listen to this. He says, the underlined bit, right? We're doing source 70. Where's it gone? Yeah, source 70. The underlined bit. What would be if it's difficult to wear it properly? Then surely we should forbid moving the shirt. Why? Because you might come to put as a gzeira, like we said before, that with the other type of box, you can't, the shidot, tevo, migdol, where you were worried you might put it on strongly, yes, b'chayzik, and therefore we forbade you to move it and to put it back. Well, maybe with a shirt that all the buttons have fallen off, maybe we should make the shirt muktzah. That would be the logic, because you might come to put the kaftar back on. What is the difference between the oven or the Ramah's extension of this, which is the bench, where a leg has fallen off? And here he says a beautiful chiluk. He says as follows: Ledina nira lahatir. He says halacha lamaisa. He feels it would be mutter. Why? Al pi mashakosav hataz, because the Taz writes the following. It's quite an interesting insight. The Taz writes, what would be if not the leg of the oven, not that it just slipped out, but what would be if it broke? So the Taz says, if the leg of the oven broke, you can move the leg, you can move the oven. Why? Because when you have the leg is there, the oven is there. All it needs is you lift up the oven and slip the leg back in, then, which you might easily do, and think, maybe it's not such a terrible thing to do, which taka, maybe it isn't, min ha-Torah, ein binyan ustira b'kelim. But there chazal were machmir. There we say no. But if it broke in half, the only way you're going to be able to do it is two things. You're going to have to do what the Taz calls a maaseh godol, a big action. In other words, you have to take this broken leg, you have to fix the leg, then you have to go and put it back in. Those two things were not chayashish. There's a limit to how worried we are about how much people will forget and come to do on Shabbos. And therefore the Taz says that what? If the leg of the oven or the leg of the bench breaks, then the bench is not muktzah. You can pick up the bench and put it on another bench. You can pick up the oven and, I don't know, put some books underneath it or something, because we're not worried you're going to fix the leg and then put it back in. If that's the case, he says maybe if all the buttons fall off your shirt, well, we're not going to be worried that you're going to sew them all back on. That we're not going to do. That's a maaseh godol. That's a maaseh godol. And therefore, he feels, this is his opinion, he feels it'll be mutter. A very interesting svara. I'm not sure all the poskim would go along with it, but that was what he holds. Let's move on. Time's running away. Now, let's go to the watch. Your watch stops on Shabbos, okay? Says the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa, and indeed, so says Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. Let's do it inside. He says as follows: if your watch stops, the underlined bit, source 71, Yesh by mishum muktzah va'asa letaltalei. It's muktzah and you can't move it. However, why? Because it has no function. That's the point. It's like the oven. You can't use it. There's nothing to do with it. Now, if it was a gold watch and it's decorative, it's a fancy watch, and you would possibly wear it even if it wasn't working because it looks nice, right? Then that would be different. Baram shaon ha'asui ketachshit kagoin shaon zahav. That if you wouldn't take it off. Generally, it's a dress watch. You wouldn't take it off if it wasn't working. Then you can keep on Shabbos. Okay. Now the door handle. Let's go to the door handle, and then finally we'll go to the glasses, and then we are basically finished. I'm rushing a little bit now. So the door handle. If the door handle falls off on Shabbos, are you allowed to reattach it? So we learnt in Sif Tez Zayin, according to Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that the leg of the broken bench might be muktzah. Why? Because Shema Yitaka, you might put it back in forcibly, So what about the door handle? Surely the door handle should be the same. The door handle should be muktzah in case you reattach it to the door, which would be an issa d'oraisa of baina, because the door is connected to the house. Okay? And also the Mishnah Berurah paskins that when the Shulchan Aruch says that the door that falls away from the closet is not muktzah, that's only a portable, something that you can move, a portable closet, because the door was part of a keli and it'll be rejoined to the keli, so that's okay. But the doors or the windows of a house are always muktzah. It was never considered a keli, and therefore a door handle, when it falls off the house, should be muktzah. Let's see how the Shmir Shabbos Kol Chasa paskins. Source 72 here. He paskins that taka it is muktzah. Yadit shekvua badeles sheyotzam im koimo. The door handle falls off. Osur lahachzira. You can't return it. V'higam asura batiltel, and it's muktzah. But then he gives you something that you could do. Yeah. Let's see what he says.
I have a question. What is it if without this piece you are not allowed to go out?
Well,
from the
okay.
toilet.
So let's Let's come back to that. Let's just finish this, then I'll come back to that. Okay. Now, what you could do is, so how do you get out? So Reb Shlomo Zalman gives you an escape route. He says you can use a screwdriver. Look over here in the underline. If you can use a screwdriver to do it, because a screwdriver is a keli shemalachta le'issa l'tzayrech gufay. So he gives you a good eitzah. He also adds, by the way, that if it is a portable doorknob, I don't know whether you see these things. Sometimes there's a doorknob that you put it on, turn it, and take it off. That would be okay, because then it's like a key. And there's one more point which is important, and that is, I don't know, sometimes it may happen to you at home. Sometimes you have a cupboard or a door or something where it becomes very loose and it's falling off the whole time. And you've always, it falls off, you put it back on, it falls off, you put it back on. That is okay. That is okay, because then, according to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, it would seem that this is more like a key, right? So a key is something which you attach to the house, turn it, and take it out again. Well, if you have a bad door handle which keeps falling off, then even if it's not a cupboard, it's the door of the house or the window, a handle on the window, let's say it isn't fixed and it's always falling off and it's loose and it comes on and off, that would be like a key. You could pick it up, put it on again, open it, take it off, that would be okay. Back to your question, Ilya, just before we move on finally to the halach about the glasses, your question, I want to add something, another halacha, by the way, which I hope none of you ever need to use, but it is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, and this is more about children than adults, and that is, if it can happen, I remember it's happened to us when we were younger, sometimes kids can go into the toilet or something like that, lock themselves in without realizing it, and then they can't get out. Let's say a young child, and they get very frightened. So that case is discussed explicitly in Shulchan Aruch, and that is considered a possible sakana for a child to be in an enclosed space where they can't get out. Yes? And you're actually allowed to break the door down. Okay? I hope it never happens to you. I hope you never need to use this halacha, but that is the halacha. But an adult, so Ilya's asking, what would be, you're stuck in wherever it is, and at what point does it become allowed? Because it's an issa durab. Well, if it is the door handle of something where it's part of the house, then it could be boiner. I'm not sure. You know what? I'm going to make a note of this. What the threshold is. At what point would it be considered possibly a sakana or something? I'd rather say I don't really know. I'm going to make a quick note about this over here. Give me a second, and I'll post it on the group. Okay, great question. Great question. I hope it never happens to you. Sort of if you're stuck in. So I need to think a little bit more about it in terms of whether it becomes a deraisa or drabonon. It is definitely the muktzah is a midrabanon. But if you reattach it loosely, that might also only be a drabonon. I'm not sure. You know what? Great question. I've written it down. I will get back to you on the group. Okay. Let us move on to our final point this evening, and then by then we will have the answer to all of our shilas. Okay, and then I'll post on the group also the notes with the questions and answers. And that is, and this can happen a lot. Anybody, I don't know, it seems that a lot of Jews wear glasses, or I don't know, even lenses, I suppose. But what happens? The handle breaks off from the frame of your glasses. Okay, so it would appear to be that the pieces are mukta, because fixing the glasses is prohibited on Shabbos. That would be similar, it would seem, to the broken bench, where all the pieces are mukta because the bench can't be comfortably used in its current state. And we're worried that you might connect it back to the frame, and therefore all the bits should be mukta. However, here is where we might have possibly a little bit more room for leniency, because we mentioned that the Mishnah Berurah says that if the leg of the bench breaks in half, then the bench isn't mukta, because fixing the bench would be considered a big job, like we saw from the Taz, a professional job, and Chazal were not concerned. You would fix it and reattach it. So if you lose the screw of your glasses, and that can happen, yeah, it gets loose, the little screw there, okay, and it breaks in such a way that you can no longer return it to the frame, then the frame and the lenses are not mukta. Says the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa, source 73 here, Adasha shenofla min hamishkafayim, if the lens falls out of the glasses, also lachzir lemekoma mishum sheyesh bo mishum tikun keli. You can't put them back in. Okay? V'chein boyrek shal hamishkafayim shenofal, and if the screw comes out, you can't put it back in either, and the screw is mukta. The ilu, however, he says at the beginning of the next paragraph, he says, what about moving what about your ability to move the lens, the sides, and the frame? He says it depends how badly it is broken. Toloi besug hakilkul. Im hu kilkul shuatzma yochel letaknam. If it's the sort of thing that you can fix without needing a professional, then harehem asurim betiltul, then indeed they're mukta. Then indeed they would be mukta, right? But the imtikunam doirish avodas mumcha, it's a bit, in English we say counterintuitive. It means it's the opposite what you might think, right? Based on what we learned before. If all it needs is just to slip it back in place. I would also add, by the way, I would just add a point. There's another point we need to add in, which is if you can still use them, yeah. We'll see. Also, he says if they look at the last paragraph, because I think this is the one that is most relevant. Some people, and I remember, you can have glasses where sometimes the frame is a bit broken and the lens falls in and out very easily. That's different. He says, if it goes in very easily, it's loose and it falls out. It doesn't need force to put it back in. Then, right? You may have had this sometimes when part of the frame is broken and it's really very loose. So there's no gezerah that you're going to put back in strongly, because you couldn't put it back in strongly if you tried. It's loose the whole time. It falls in and out easily. So there's 3 levels. So there are really 3 levels in glasses that are breaking, okay? If they are, the frame is very loose and the lens falls in and out the whole time, kein problem, right? Because there's no gezerah that you're going to do it, put it back in strongly, because you can't. Then there is the middle level, which is that you could put it back in properly. You'd fix it by putting it back in properly. Then it's muktzah. That's the middle level, and you can't do that, right? Like with the bench, and that's assuming, by the way, that as it is, it can't be used. Okay, I must add that point. It's got to be similar to the bench or the oven, which as it is, it can't be used. Therefore, if you could fix it yourself, remember, always ask yourself, is it like the bench? Is it like the oven? If the bench, you can just lift up and slide the leg back in. Said Chazal, no, we're not going to let you do that. Okay, so if your frame isn't broken, but you could take the lens and force it back in. It's not a big deal. You could do it yourself. Then it's actually muktzah. If, however, it is really broken and you couldn't even put it back in if you tried, you need to take it to the optician to mend it, then you could make some sort of temporary solution. Okay, so there's 3 levels. It's very important to remember this. Okay, let's just finish off with the final point over here, and then I shall let you go. 1 second. Yeah, the final point is the sorry, just a second. Rebbe Ovadia Yosef sees things slightly differently. Okay, he says as follows. He says he comes up with an interesting svara, which not like the Shmir Shabbos Kolchosa, so it's worth remembering. He sees it a bit differently. How? He says as follows. This is source 70. Hold on, I've lost my own place. This is source 74. Yeah. So he says as follows. Kvan is Bayer La'el. We've seen earlier that if the lens falls out, if you really need it, he says if a person, he argues on the Shmir Shabbos Kolchasa. He says that this middle category, if it doesn't need an a professional to put it back in, you can do it. Why? He says an interesting svara. He says, what did the Gemara say? Why was it also? Because we're worried Shemo Yitka, you'll put it in with strength. He says a person won't do that with their glasses. They will be scared they're breaking it. So they'll do it carefully and gently and softly. He says, therefore, the Gezerah doesn't apply. Really interesting. And I would say if you are stuck in the middle of nowhere and you really need to, then you can rely on this. Says Rebbe Ovadia Yosef, you don't need to be worried about this Gezerah. You're going to be worried whether the glass will break if you do it b'koyach. So we actually have a machlokas between the Shmir Shabbos Kolchosa and Rebbe Ovadia Yosef on this point. And if I can have 2 more minutes, it's literally the last thing, because I really want to finish the shilas. We didn't do the stroller. It's quite straightforward. It's not too difficult. The last shilah is the stroller, the wheel falling off the stroller. So the Shmir Shabbos Kolchosa paskins, the stroller is muktzah. Source 75 here. Let's do it quickly. He writes as follows. And the reason is because it's exactly the same as the broken leg if it's easily attached. Okay. Well, he says as follows: if it easily snaps back in, a lot of these strollers, from what I remember, it's been a while, but from what I remember, some of the they like almost clip in and out the wheel. Yeah, and you bang it in and it clips into place. I would say that is the case that the Shmir Shabbos Kolchos is talking about. He says im benakel nitel takenes haton tikun. If you can easily fix it, then osur lehishtamesh bagolazu. Then you can't use the buggy. The af osur letaltala, and then the buggy itself becomes muktzah gzeira shema yavel second by bayom. In case you come to fix it, that is how the Shmir Shabbos Kolchosa paskins. The only thing I would add is that, and this is why I need to research this a little bit. I'm a little bit unhappy with this, if I'm honest, because there is only one way. I'm not sure how the Gezerah of Shema Yitka would apply to the buggy. I'm not sure. He seems to be applying it. I'm not sure I fully understand why that would apply, because it's not as if there's different ways of doing it. There's only one way. You snap it back in and it clips back in and that's it, finished. Mind you, I suppose you could say the same thing with maybe you could say the same thing with the bench. If there's a Gezerah Shema Yitka with the bench, but that's if there's 2 ways of doing it. This is what I understood. There's 2 ways. This is how I understood the Gemara. Maybe I'm wrong. There are 2 ways of doing it. When you could put it back into the bench, you could put the leg back into the bench softly and slip it in. Chazal said, no, don't do it because Gezerah Shema Yitka, because you have 2 ways potentially of doing it. My understanding of the reality, the Metzius with the buggy, is there is only one way of doing it. If you're just going to put it on, it'll fall off again 3 seconds later. You've got to clip it in. There is only one way. So I'm not sure how that applies, but that maybe is a story for the next time. So we have actually answered all 7 shilas. I will send them to you shortly. I don't know whether I'll manage tonight, if not tomorrow or the next day, Bli Neder, so that we're able to continue next week. So hopefully some really practical shilas. I hope you don't have an epic Shabbos like this guy with none of these shilas, but at least if you do, you know what to do. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'll put everything in the Google Drive. And we'll see you hopefully before next week. Thank you. Be well. Kol Tuv. Good night, everybody.